Learn how to take your company from asset-based lending to traditional financing with Chelsea Yarmuch, the Director of Finance at McKillican, on today's episode of the Executive Wins Podcast. Welcome to the Executive Wins Podcast, where senior leaders share their biggest wins so you can get inspired and grow your business. Here's your host, Gordon Shepherd. Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Gordon Shepherd. And I just want to take a second to say thanks to everyone that supports this show. Your feedback has been absolutely invaluable. And I really appreciate all of your guest recommendations because it means that I get to meet more inspiring executives who will share their unique achievements. And that will inspire every listener to use what they've heard to grow their business. And that is why I do what I do. Thank you. On today's episode, you're going to learn how Chelsea Yarmuch, the Director of Finance for McKillican, switched her company from asset-based lending to traditional financing. And that helped to save the company a lot of time and money. But before we get started, I just want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by the Executive Wins Workshop. In this high-impact workshop, executive teams learn how to reverse engineer past wins in a structured way so they can get more wins in the future. This highly interactive session is for senior leadership teams who want to improve profitability, processes, communication, and a whole lot more. I'll be your facilitator, bringing 25 plus years of experience and a proven 5-step system that will help you to grow your business. It's available in half-day, full-day, and customizable formats, and it's great for team building and corporate retreats. There's also an in-depth version I call a wins audit, and this is when I interview people from all levels of your company to find out how they get their wins. And then I deliver a summary to the executive team. And because I'm not in the family, the results are real. So if you're an executive who wants an honest assessment about how people in your company get their wins, and you also want insightful feedback about whether or not those wins are actually aligned with your strategy, then visit executivewins.com/workshops to learn more. And now on to today's show. I am super excited to be joined by Chelsea Yarmuch, the Director of Finance for McKillican, one of North America's largest wholesale distributors of architectural and specialty building materials. She is also a confident, insightful leader who is always on the lookout for cost-saving opportunities so she can help her company to thrive. In this episode, Chelsea shares a win that all executives can learn from. She tells us why she switched her company from asset-based lending to traditional financing. And don't be intimidated by all of the accounting jargon, because she does a great job of breaking it down so you can fully understand why this approach saved her company hundreds of thousands of dollars and freed up a ton of time for her finance team. You'll also be inspired by her confident attitude and the skills she has for managing major changes and helping all stakeholders to find alignment, take action, and get profitable results. And now here's Chelsea Yarmuch with her executive win. Chelsea, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
It's really good to have you here. I'm just so excited to hear you share your win with everybody. And usually when people come on these things, I'm not sure that too many people necessarily know who you are, your role, and kind of where you work. And take a minute to introduce yourself so we can know those things.
Yeah, sure. My name is Chelsea Yarmuch. I'm currently the Director of Finance at a wholesale distribution of construction building materials company. They are in Canada and the U.S., so Western Canada, Western U.S., Texas, and Hawaii. Interesting company for sure. And I manage their accounting, accounts payable, accounts receivable, and payroll.
Wholesale distribution. So never a dull day. I imagine if I say SKUs or number of items getting distributed, it's a lot. Is that fair?
A lot of inventory, but super interesting. Think about anything you could put in your kitchen, from the countertops to different cabinets, handles, knobs, slides, all of those sorts of fun things.
So builders love you because you're getting that stuff out to the world, I'm sure, as sort of those things are getting done, and you become how many years has the company been in business?
Oh, they're getting close to 50 years.
50 years is, you got to be pretty good at it, right? If you kind of
Exactly.
get going. And just for context, how many years ago did you join the company before we get started in our conversation here?
I joined in 2018.
2018. So about 6 years ago, you get in, and then I get to start us off here and say, great. Since then, tell me about your biggest win and describe it for us.
Yeah, for sure. So normally when I look at an organization, I'm always looking for large expense items. I really love trying to mitigate expenses, trying to make the organization more successful. And one of the line items that I saw that was large was banking, and it was lending, to be specific, asset-based lending. Asset-based lending, as you might know, is for an organization, and they can kind of go up and down with the flows of the company. It's a little bit different than traditional lending. You do have a lot more expenses with asset-based lending. So, for example, you're going to have bank audits, you're going to have third-party inventory audits. The bank is likely going to make you have an audit from a third-party organization. You might have higher interest rates, a lot more banking fees. And obviously, some organizations will have these sorts of things, and other organizations maybe won't, or they'll have a couple additional items. So when I look at something like this, I want to know why. Why do they use it? How long have they used it? Does it make sense to still have that line item on there?
Because this is a company that's been in business for decades, and then you get there about 6 years ago, and you're sort of, getting into the mix of things, and you make this discovery. And asset-based lending, I'm just going to say overall for what you're describing, there's a lot more activity with it, for example, and maybe higher risk and higher cost, just generally, if we're in the asset-based lending zone.
Higher cost and also a lot more work from the accounting side. So you have all of these audits. Your reporting requirements to the bank are going to be more frequent than traditional lending. Traditional lending isn't going to go up and down as easy as the asset-based lending. So there is that difference there. And obviously for people out there, maybe this is right for your organization, asset-based lending. Maybe you could look at traditional lending and see if it makes sense for you as well.
And just for fun, so I know, if it's asset-based lending and I can't pay the loan, do they take my assets? Is that what happens?
For sure. Definitely.
Wow. This is a punitive thing. So here's a company that's been functioning for a long time. You arrive on the scene, and we've got some Chelsea magic that happens in this win. Is that fair?
Sure.
What was your insight? Because you said you were looking into this moment. What was the insight for you?
Yeah, and the insight for me was just like the sheer amount of cost that was associated to it. And as an accountant, we always look to see like how expensive are things, and how much time and effort are you going to put forward to try and look into something, and does it make sense to look into it? And for me, I wanted to look into this to see whether or not we could change it. And obviously with traditional lending, like you're going to run into certain requirements as well. And, if you can't pay the loan, then obviously they're going to see some assets as well. So, what's going to be the best for the organization, and what kind of benefit are we going to see from it? And the more I dug into it, the more I said, I don't know if this makes sense, but let's work with the bank and see what the other options are, and then work with the executive team and work with other key stakeholders to make sure that, this makes sense for the organization, and that they're still going to be able to have as much lending as they do today with ABL, tomorrow with traditional lending. And that's kind of where I got with it. And walking through those steps, I realized that, there could be some huge cost savings here, because if you're getting a bank audit twice a year, $20,000 a pop, there's $40,000. Inventory audit, $25,000. And then third-party audit, there's another $40,000 that the bank requires you to do. Interest could be anywhere from $150,000 to $300,000 per year. Other bank fees could be upwards of $40,000, $50,000. So, once you start looking at some of those numbers, you're like, wow, this is actually pretty expensive. And that's not even taking into account the weekly reporting, all of the time in the audits that your team is spending on these different things. So, after I made the decision and said, hey, this makes sense for us to switch, I got buy-in from the executive team. We got buy-in from the bank. The bank said, yes, we could do this. We could switch you over to the traditional lending. I made sure that my team was on board and everyone understood what we were going to be moving towards and made the switch. And, those aren't just one-time expenses. Those are going to be continuation of expenses every single year that we're going to be saving.
What a great win. And how lucky, because I mean, obviously you got this done in an hour, right? You recognize the problem. It just took an hour and you just talked to everybody. It was all easy. Is that the right thing?
Oh, yeah, no problem. An hour. No, it definitely takes time. Anything banking related, you're going to have to negotiate different interest rates or different agreements with the bank to make sure that that type of lending is going to work for you and that you're going to have the same amount of borrowing capacity as you previously did, as well as buy-in. Like if you have ABL lending today and you've had it for 10 years, I would be a little bit cautious to switch to something else unless it made sense. And you definitely don't want to have any holes in it because if you make the switch and you don't have the lending capacity that you need, that's a problem.
Wow. So this is a significant impact on, again, something, business has been around for a while. You're there, you're kind of newer guy in a sense for your first little while. And you make this recognition and you start that process. Wow. What a great win, because I'm hearing the hundreds of thousands of dollars. And then I'm just going to say a lot of time that could then be spent on probably higher value activities, for your team and for other people. The 5-part framework that I would call the anatomy of a win is what I like to jump into at this point. And it's got these 5 steps. And it's this idea of what was the strategy behind it? What was the work plan? Were the people involved? What was happening operationally and what were the results? And so when you look at it strategically, from your perspective, what was the strategy behind getting this to happen?
The strategy was just, how can we make this happen? But still keep the borrowing capacity for the organization? How can we make what seems like a small change to have a large impact on the organization that continues to help the organization for years to come?
Borrowing capacity, pretty critical, because, you've described, without getting into it, you've described a global operation where the borrowing levels need to be where they need to be. Especially
Exactly.
because you would ebb and flow with your scaling opportunities and, with your level of reputation. I'm sure there's all that kind of growth things in the background. Because if you're in your strategic plan, for example, you're ready to go and take on another territory or whatever that is because you're around the world, right? This is really critical.
Exactly. Yeah. You want to pick up a new product line or expand into new territory. You need to make sure that that borrowing capacity is there so that the organization is able to continue to follow their strategic plan.
Makes total sense. So now you've put them in a better position where you're saving them this money, and also you've got sort of similar terms on the borrowing capacity side, and strategically that was very intentional, and you kind of got that going forward. The second step then is a practical step. I was, having fun before saying it takes an hour, but I mean, there's sort of, take me through the timeline. Like there's a moment where you recognize this, and then what were kind of the what, who, and when steps that sort of made this move forward?
Yeah, I mean, when I first started, I noticed it. And, you always keep it in the back of your mind to be like, is that something I'm going to be able to change? And during that time, there was a ERP conversion that was happening. So, we want to change a couple of things. You don't want a bunch of major changes all at one time because that can be very stressful on the organization and the employees. So during that time, I kind of waited, but still kept it in the back of my mind, learning what the organization needed and how they would be able to get that by moving away from the ABL. So once I kind of waited that out and the ERP conversion was done and we were able to pick up all the process improvements and efficiencies from that, then I circled back around to it and said, does it make sense at this time to look further into it? And at that time it did. It made sense to look further into it to see what the other options are out there and how we can maintain that moving forward. And that's when I reached out to the bank and got suggestions from them on how we could go about doing this without changing the capacity of the lending. And, when you have a good relationship with a bank, they'll definitely help you out and can help move the organization forward as well. So it was probably, I would say, 6 to 8 months from the time that we said, okay, this makes sense, to being able to switch everything over to the traditional lending.
And you're being kind because, again, that's the good high-level part of it. There would have been multiple meetings with your senior leadership. It sounds like you have a joy for change. Do you know what I mean? Like just the change discussions that would have been like, well, hey, wait a second, new guy, like we did it this way for a long time. Kind of, can you sell? Was there moments where you kind of had to sell it along the way as well?
Oh, for sure. You definitely have to get the buy-in from not only the executive team, but making sure that the other employees that had long tenure with the organization and were used to that type of lending or those audits, that they all had buy-in. Because if you don't have that buy-in from other employees, executives, the bank, other parties that are going to be interested in that, it could be pretty rough and it might not go as smoothly as you had hoped.
No doubt. And then when we look at that work plan part, there's really just some paperwork reality that has to occur, right? There's some mountains to be moved when you're hitting, I'm going to say, I don't know, is there regulatory? Is there, what frameworks what are the moments along the way that might be some highlight moments when you're changing over this type of banking thing? And again, who's it impacting?
Oh, yeah, totally. You definitely have to look at what rules and regulations are out there, especially when you're not only in Canada, but internationally. What are they required to do? And then the reporting requirements for the bank, and then the reporting requirements if you're getting an audit or a review engagement from a public practice, making sure that all of those boxes are checked off.
So many things, again, along that practical part, and somewhere then you're getting the paperwork together, you've got this change part, you're having these conversations, it's getting towards the finish line. What are those last few finishing steps that kind of get it over the line? Like, do you show up in a hotel room and sign papers? Like, what occurs?
Yeah, trying to coordinate everything to get it all signed off on, trying to figure out, what previously did we do and what do we need to do now? What are the changes in the reporting requirements to the bank or, to your third-party auditors, or if you're changing those sorts of things? And, it's all changes that happen and you're like, okay, what other things are going to change because of this? And another thing, in addition to changing this, we were able to downgrade our audit to a review. Which also, cost savings. You just see all of these chain reactions happening because if the organization doesn't require an audit engagement and you can have it downgraded into a review engagement from your accounting firm, then, that's pretty cool too, decrease expenses, again, time savings. So your employees don't have to pull all the information for the audit. But again, like, what makes sense for your organization? Do you want to keep having the audit engagement? Do you need it for something else? Or is it only a banking requirement?
I love it. The cost benefit analysis, if we got in there and we looked at sort of the $1,000 an hour people and the $100 an hour people and all the impacts that this would have had, what a nice ripple effect. And again, I'm sure if we sort of got the fine-tooth comb out, we would hear all those exact steps along the way. There was a moment when it closed, like along that timeline. What was the moment when you knew it was a green light and all your efforts had sort of come to fruition?
Yeah, when I got the green light, everything was signed off on. And like previously, we were having to do weekly reporting. We didn't have to do that anymore. And it was like, okay, now what am I going to do with my time? Now we have to find something else that we can work on. Right? All of this extra spare time, what can we use the other accounting employees for? What am I going to spend my time on? And it's just looking for that next thing that you can help move the dial and move the organization forward.
What a major, and again, we're crisscrossing back into the practical parts, how that influences strategy. You can hear the circular part of how that sort of helps to build up. And you can also hear your own strategic thinking. How nice to have, it's one thing to punch the numbers. It's another thing to have a global thinker involved who actually likes change. That's a pretty interesting combo that you've got going there in terms of what you've described. The third step in the anatomy of a win, we've just talked about the strategy and the work plan, is the people involved. So I'm just going to help you walk through it a little bit. And maybe if you can describe the people, but also along the way, like, what about the attitude and skill sets, attitude and competency levels that sort of each person brought to it? Let's start with you. I mean, how would you describe your own attitude and competency level to actually initiate this and just describe that?
Yeah. And like, that's a great point, because the understanding and, ability to be able to make this sort of change, most of the time people are just like, asset-based lending, traditional lending, like, I don't understand. How about you deal with it? Or like, I trust you. And you're just like, you take a step back and you say, how can I present this in a way that makes sense, that other people can understand and be on board with and give input? Because other people in the organization might be able to contribute something that you're not able to contribute, or they might see something that, you didn't see, and they're able to help move it forward that way. So from like executive management, obviously, executives most of the time will understand it, but just making sure that it's in a simple format that they understand, but also trying to communicate from the bank back to the executive team. Because sometimes when you're dealing with the bank and they're talking about, cross-border or, the interest rates or the different types of lending, you really want to make sure that you fully understand what they're talking about. And if you need to do additional research and come back with questions, and then being able to communicate that in a manner to the executive team, and then also communicating it, to your senior accounting team or your junior accounting team that's going to be pulling data or information for you, so that it's presented in a way that they're going to understand and, possibly have some questions or give some input on it.
It's so rich listening to what you're saying, because underneath there's also, you've got your own sort of confidence level. Like, right, this isn't for the lighthearted to initiate something like this, because, it depends on where you're thinking. So there's something about you, the Chelsea factor, that kind of gets this kicked off. And there's also that detective part of like, wait a minute, I want to keep this on the radar because we know it's going to be sort of good things to pay off along the way. And then you've got this ability to storytell. So, of course, that your other senior executives don't have a chance to go and learn to be accountants. So you've got to be able to package that up and make it all that kind of translate. So you're translating between these people. You got the bankers involved. How are you what would you say their sort of attitude and approach to this was from the people point of view?
I think it totally depends on the bank that you're dealing with. And the bank that we were dealing with was very supportive, understanding, and they were able to research it themselves, because I feel like sometimes maybe they don't fully understand like the different options. So they'll go back to their team and say, is there another option from this perspective or that perspective? And coming back and circling back around and letting us know, hey, these are the options. And sometimes you'll come back and say, hey, I don't fully understand this. Can you give me a little bit more information on this? Or what kind of interest rate or what kind of requirements are you going to require with this? And they were extremely helpful with that.
That's so lucky. So you can hear you're building the partnership in a sense, right? You've got a good banking partner on board. You've got support from your senior leaders. And again, what would you say your senior leaders' attitude? What would you say initially? There's a first moment where it comes out of your mouth. You're like, hey, folks, we're doing it this way. We would like to make a change. Like, what's that moment like? And then what was the progression of that from the people side?
Totally. And I agree. Like, sometimes you come at it and you're just like, hey, I think, this might be an option. We should look into this, maybe we should switch. does it make sense to switch? And then they're just like, oh, I don't know. We've done it this way for so long. I'm not sure if it makes sense at this point in time. What's our lending capacity going to be at? And then you come back and you're like, okay, well, let me just crunch some numbers here and I'll get back to you and let you know, how much cost savings it's going to be, what our lending capacity is going to be. And I feel like that's kind of the approach that I like to take is, dropping little tidbits of information, being like, maybe we should do this. And then saying, hey, it makes sense for us to do this. And this is why.
And if we accelerate down the timeline, then there's that initial reluctance, and then you're dripping in the story. You can hear your experience speaking there loudly. What was it like when they when they saw it all come together? What was their response?
This makes sense. Once you fully understand it, it made sense to them to make the switch. And it's gathering all of that data, all of that information, and making sure that all of their questions and concerns were answered. And I think as long as you're able to answer any concerns or questions from the other executives, they're able to buy into the idea, and then they're able to come around and say, hey, yeah, you know what? We did it this way, but now it makes more sense to do it this way, and we're going to have all of these cost savings. And I think right now, after COVID, a lot of organizations with the huge inflation rate, this is what they're looking for. They're looking to see what you can make changes to in the organization and not have a decreased level of service, decreased level of lending, those sorts of things, and benefit from it. Benefit from the cost savings.
And the other people that were involved would have been people on your team, do you know what I mean, that are sort of executing on this. There's an element of that. By the way, 6 to 8 months sounds lightning fast for this type of change to me. Like, I don't know your world. It just sounds like, again, the buy-in, the change, the shift, the paperwork that you described, all the players involved. And if I had to, so there's the bank, there's your senior leadership team, there's your team itself, any other players involved, like I'm going to say the auditors get sort of a decreased role to a certain degree. So the auditors, anybody else that we might have missed if you had to describe the people involved?
I think that's probably about everyone that was involved. And I would say like the auditors, our accountants, like they also had a role in this because we had to make sure that we were meeting all of the reporting requirements. As soon as you have cross-border, it just adds that extra level of difficulty that you have to make sure that you're following any international rules.
Multi-jurisdiction, always a level much more complex for sure. Great, that's the people thing so eloquently described. And then the fourth step is this operational component. So there's a way that you were operating before. You had all this reporting. There would have been rules and procedures in place to deal with asset-based lending. And then operationally, things would have had to switch over. So can you describe that a little bit on the operational brass tacks part?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like a sigh of relief because, man, with the ABL, like you do have a lot of reporting requirements. So you're going to have like your banking audit. And I mean, other organizations, they might be different. The one that I was dealing with, this is what happens specifically is, you have your banking audit and it was twice per year. So you're pulling all of the paperwork for that. You're doing all of the analysis. So it's time consuming. And then they had their inventory audit, which also, again, they'd come in, very time consuming, pulling information, doing analysis for them. And then our third party auditor, and they would come in and again, multiple staff pulling different samples and information requests and doing all sorts of analysis and stuff like that. And once you move away from that, you got to figure out what are those employees going to do with that time after, right? Like, what else can we do to help shift the organization, move it forward, make sure that, if there's other processes that we can improve and just making those sorts of changes.
Love it. And then also in the operational part, I'm always curious about touching on, there's a regulatory component, there's a cross-border component to this. There probably is a legal component. Any lawyers involved as well?
The legal part of it was, I would say, fairly minimal. With any banking changes, you obviously have to get new contracts, new agreements done up with the bank. So I found that moving away from the ABL to traditional lending has less legal nuances than the ABL did. The ABL I found was a little bit more expensive than the traditional. So yeah, a little bit illegal, but less.
But less. Super.
But less.
And then the fifth step in the anatomy is, how do you measure the results? Like what do you measure to know that this was a win?
For me, it was the cost savings and being able to see the amount of hours decrease. Not only my hours, but the accounting staff hours, the accounts payable, accounts receivable, payroll, even purchasing, like all the different samples that they would be pulling for the audits. So just that huge number of the cost, the sheer cost of it, and then also the amount of hours that were significantly decreased from doing way less audits.
Love it. How would you measure the intangibles? Like, how to make you feel?
Made me feel great. It's a nice win. It makes you feel good inside, but also it's a team effort. So you look around and you say, hey, we did this, and it's a huge check mark for the year. You start looking at the different initiatives that you have going on. And like you said, you calculate, this cost savings, this amount of hours, and you look around to your team and you say, hey, good work, everybody. Like, we did something awesome this year. Now, what are we going to do next year to top it,
That's so exciting. I just love the way that's gone. And again, you got the tangible results, you got the intangible results. I just have to ask, was there a celebration at the end of all this? What happened?
I don't know. I think it's just me feeling good inside.
Desmond Tutu once said, there's only one way to eat an elephant, and that is one bite at a time. That's exactly what Chelsea did to get this win. First, she gently introduced the idea of asset-based lending to the leadership team, and then she asked them to think about it. Then she brought back evidence and won over key players both internally and externally. And then she was able to get this major win over the finish line, and that led ultimately to huge savings in both time and money for her company. What an outstanding leadership approach, and it shows us all how to be patient and play the long game. If you enjoyed listening to this episode, then make sure to check out some of our other shows, including Saving Local Taxpayers Millions by Finding a Better Solution, how CAO Jody Brown got a win for the town of Bon Accord. And if you want a great team-building opportunity, then check out our workshops at executivewins.com/workshops to learn more. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe and leave a review and share it with a fellow leader. And don't forget to check out all the links and resources in the show notes. And keep listening to the Executive Wins podcast for more inspiring wins that will help you grow yourself, grow your team, and your entire business. Thanks for listening to the Executive Wins podcast. Make sure to rate, review, and subscribe as we bring you more inspiring wins from outstanding leaders so you can grow your business.